professor at Arid Agriculture University, Rawalpindi. She is an expert in evaluating gender roles in the wake of climate change, changing value chains, and changing social structures. She also worked with Australian Center for International Agriculture Research and USAID. We welcome another esteemed panelist, Dr. Irfanullah, Deputy Director, Pakistan Nutrition International, with us. He has extensive 22 years of experience of working with development sector and the government. We also have a young representative with us, Muhammad Danial Masood. He is a student of NUST University and also worked on food security and regional trade in agriculture through a platform of STBI and Ministry of Food Security. And a special thank to all of you, the participants who joined, who are in person with us and also who are attending online. Now I welcome Ms. Coco Shiyama, Country Director WFP, Pakistan, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, and good morning, Honorable Minister, esteemed speakers, in person and online. It's a great pleasure for me to speak and share a few thoughts as we look forward to hearing from our panelists on this important topic of climate change, food security, and nutrition in Pakistan. But let me start also with the global picture. Unfortunately, globally, hunger is rising. We talk typically of the 3 C's. It's conflict, climate, and COVID-triggered economic downturns as some of the key drivers of hunger. Currently, humanitarian needs will see, however, what we can say also is that current humanitarian needs will seem small compared to the potential rise in if governments and we, partners, fail to tackle climate change now, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected settings. In recent years, we have seen a staggering rise in hunger in terms of number and severity due to extreme weather events. This year alone, we saw the longest-lived tropical cyclone on record in southern Africa, record-breaking heat waves and wildfires across Europe, North America, and Asia, and flash floods following an unprecedented 3-year-long drought in the Horn of Africa. Over 40% of the global population lives in areas that are highly vulnerable to climate extremes, and in 2022, climate extremes were the primary driver of acute food insecurity for almost 57 million people in 12 countries. Countries like Pakistan and communities who contribute the least to climate crisis are suffering losses of and damages to lives, livelihoods, and harvests caused by more frequent and severe climate events. In fragile and conflict-affected settings, extreme weather events affect 3 times as many people annually compared to other countries. Despite this, people living in these extremely fragile states receive 80 times less climate finance compared to those in non-fragile states. So these are very worrying indicators and trends, but I also want to share that we can do a lot now with greater commitments and investments. Climate change can reduce escalating humanitarian needs. We can break out of the never-ending cycle of crisis and response. But to do that, we must focus on preparedness and protection before predictable climate shocks hit. For that, we focus particularly on system strengthening. Transforming the global food systems helps to tackle climate change and safeguard food security in the most vulnerable communities. This should include soil restoration, promoting local production of climate-smart foods, reducing post-harvest losses, but also importantly, linking to climate resilience shock protection systems. Shock responsive social protection is already happening in many of the countries, including Pakistan, but we can also scale up further solutions that work, such as climate-friendly school meals programs. So we know what big challenges ahead, but we also have the solutions for scale up and impact. And today we look very much forward to hearing more from our esteemed speakers, what can be done. We are calling on the international community to unite to protect people and their food security on the front lines of climate emergency. We look forward to hearing more and learning, but again, linking our knowledge to further action. And I think it's very timely also ahead of COP28 and with the representation of Pakistan in the global discussions to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Coco, for elaborating the impact of climate change and with the focus of financing and investment requirement for that are required for the preparedness and also for required for the scaling up the shock responsive social protection that we all know we need, and we need to think more about this. Now I request Dr. Frederick Grab, Head of Economics and Market at WFP, for her views on global debate around climate change, nutrition, and food security nexus. Over to you, Dr. Grab.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and giving me the opportunity to speak. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, and then I'm going to present my slides, or are you going to present them for me?
It's up to you. If
okay,
you
let
can
me try
share.
If it works.
Yes, it's working.
Perfect. Okay, so to set the scene, I'm going to talk about the global food security situation, and I'm going to put Pakistan's food security challenges into the wider context of today's global food security picture, and also talk about the various drivers of food insecurity and relate climate change to them as one of the key drivers, of course. Because this session is about climate change, but when we talk about food security, Coco already referred to the 3 C's, so there are various big drivers to consider. And so I'm going to jump right into it. These 3 main drivers of food insecurity are conflict and insecurity, economic shocks, and the climate crisis, if you want to put them in 3 buckets. And I'm going to go through them one by one, starting with economic shocks. So on this slide, you see changes in global food prices and prices of other staple or basic commodities. And what we see at the global level is that prices have come down sharply from their peaks in 2022 that were triggered by the war in Ukraine, and which launched what we call the global food crisis. So in 2022, in early 2022, we had food price spikes for maize, for wheat, and overall very high food prices, very high fertilizer prices, very high energy prices on global markets. And today, prices have come down. So that's the column in the middle. You see, for example, the food price index, and these are IMF indices on the slide, is nearly at the same level as where we were before the start of the war in Ukraine. But if you compare today to where we were before COVID, you can see that across the board, prices are still at crisis level. So the food price index is 26% higher than before the start of the COVID pandemic. Fertilizer prices more than 100% higher. Natural gas prices 143% higher. And if you look at individual commodities, you see maize 33% higher, rice 45% higher, wheat 31% higher. So it's still it continues to be a worrisome picture, even though there has been some relief, of course. And these are global prices. But if you or me go and buy rice, of course, we don't pay the global market price, but we pay the price in our local shop. and that's domestic prices. And this is what this slide is about. And the message here is that despite this recent decrease in global prices, we are still at very high price levels locally. So out of 163 countries for which we have recent data, 44 countries currently have food inflation of at least 10%. Then we have 9 countries with food inflation larger than 50%, and in 4 countries, food prices have more than doubled over the last year. And to put Pakistan into this picture, the October data show food inflation at 27%, and it has come down a little bit recently, but it's still quite a high level. And there are, of course, also risks to the recent downward trend. And these data refer to the last year, but if we take a step back and look at price changes domestically, from over the last 4 years, so roughly from the onset of or shortly before the COVID pandemic to today, we see that in 118 countries out of 171 for which we have data, 4-year food inflation is 25% or higher. So food prices over those 4 years have increased by 25% or more. In 40 countries, it was more than 50%. In 23 countries, prices have doubled or more since the start of the COVID pandemic. And in 5 countries, we even have a 4-year food inflation of 500% or higher. And again, Pakistan here sits at in the group of the 23 countries. Food inflation over the last 4 years was 122%. So it's really various a longer term phenomenon that erodes people's purchasing power, and those whose access to food was already or who were already struggling to access food before the COVID pandemic, they really have been it's been very, very challenging for them to access food. And what partly drives domestic food inflation is currency depreciation. And we have currently 27 countries where currencies have lost 15% or more of their value over the last year. And again, Pakistan is one of them. It's about 20% the currency value loss over the last year. And this is also particularly worrisome because of the current global debt picture. So the mean debt level of low-income countries reached 67% of GDP, and we currently have almost 60% of low-income countries in debt distress or at high risk of debt distress. And again, here Pakistan is a case in point when talking about debt issues, and that is critical for food security, because the money that countries spend on servicing their debt is money that they do not spend on social protection or on health or education. So over the last years, on average, Pakistan spent 5 times as much on servicing debt than on resources that went into health, and 2 times as much on net debt payments than on education. And the debt situation is particularly worrisome when considering that interest rates have been rising, so that makes servicing the debt even more expensive. And global economic growth is slow by historical standards, which also then means that countries don't necessarily have the resources to service the debt. And here also Pakistan, after 2 consecutive years of stellar growth, for this year, the prediction or the forecast is that it will have minimal growth. So it's really, in a way, an example of the countries that are affected by this difficult or in a difficult economic position currently. And what all these different elements mean when you put them together is that we have 45 countries that are strongly affected by the food crisis and who have seen their GDP growth weakened, who've seen their external balances widening, and whose foreign exchange reserves have dropped to a very low level. And that's not just us as WFP saying it, but this is actually IMF findings. moving on to the next big driver of food insecurity, that's conflict. And on this slide, you see that, so it's a long time series starting in 1946, and conflicts have really increased sharply in the last 10 years. So in 2012, we were at 33 conflicts. In 2022, that's the last data point that we have here, we're at 55 conflicts. And that is a critical driver of food insecurity, as you can see on the next slide. So we currently have 333 million people that are acutely food insecure in 78 countries where WFP is operating and where we have data available, and 70%, or 235 million, facing acute food insecurity live in fragile or conflict-affected situations. So it's a really important driver. And well, here, while Pakistan Pakistan is not a conflict country, but you have, of course, neighboring countries like Afghanistan with conflict issues, and there are spillovers that also mean that Pakistan has some security challenges that come from are brought in from the neighbors. Moving on to the last big driver and the most important for this session, climate shocks. So on this slide, we look at the trends over the last 60 years. So we're putting them in buckets of 20 years each. And then we look at the average of climate-related disasters every year. And you can see that in the 2 decades, the 60s and 70s, we had an average of 70 climate-related disasters every year. Then in the following 2 decades, this number increased to 217 climate-related disasters every year. And in the most recent 20 years, so from 2003 to 2022, we had an average of 333 climate-related disasters. And this trend is exactly what we also see when we zoom in on Pakistan only. And actually, when looking at running the same stats, not for the whole world, but for Pakistan, we even get a multiplier of 2. So we had 2.7 climate-related disasters every year on average in the 80s and 90s, and 5.4 in the last 2 decades. So an even sharper increase than at the global average level. And here you can see the different types of climate shocks that we are talking about. So this includes droughts, extreme temperatures, floods, glacial lake outbursts, landslides, storms, and wildfires. And you can see across the board there's an increase in the frequency, and even some events like the glacial lake outbursts that never happened before this millennium. And now we've already seen 3 in the last 20 years. And of course, floods is also something that Pakistan was heavily affected by, especially last year when the monsoon season brought record-breaking rainfalls and affected 33 million people, and when nearly 10% of the country was flooded at one point. And what these disasters mean is that we have a lot of internal displacement. So here you can see by different type of disaster, the weather-related displacements that this disaster triggered in 2022. And again, here the 19.2 million of flood-related internal displacements stand out. And of course, Pakistan is responsible for more than 8 million of these internal displacements with last year's floods, which were actually the world's largest disaster displacement event in 1 decade. So again, an issue that is very familiar to Pakistan. When looking at forced displacement more broadly, so not just internal displacement, but refugees and people who have crossed borders or have been forced to cross borders, we see the same worrying trend that we see in the climate data or in the conflict data, a sharp rise up over the last 10 years. The latest data that we have from UNHCR is 110 million forcibly displaced people in mid-2023. And this is actually the forcibly displaced people because of conflict and insecurity. So the climate or weather-related displacement is not counted here. So if you count that in, it would be even a higher figure. And again, it's familiar to Pakistan. Pakistan hosted 2.1 million refugees in mid-2023. And with that, it's among the top 5 countries in terms of absolute numbers of refugees that they host. And of course, forcibly displaced people are some of the most vulnerable to food insecurity. So that's a big issue. Here you have a breakdown. I already mentioned that the figure, the 110 million, includes includes refugees, includes asylum seekers. The biggest chunk is actually internally displaced persons because of conflict and violence. But then you have some 5 million of other people in need of international protection. And well, with all these trends in mind, when you bring it all together, the outcome of that is a sharp rise in global food insecurity. So when we look back to before the pandemic, we were at around 135 million acutely hungry people in 55 countries. And then with the pandemic, we see a sharp increase because of this loss of access to food that was then again exacerbated when global prices spiked and it became even harder for people to pay for their food. And we are currently at 333 million people in 78 countries who face acute food insecurity. That's a slight drop from last year, which is partly due to the country coverage and methodological issues. So I would consider it more of a stabilization rather than us being on the right trajectory again. And for WFP, this means that we have been setting or been forced to set in a way record after record over the last years in terms of the beneficiaries we reached. So we're now the aim for this year is 177 million. And you can see that when you look at the ratio of the yellow part of each of the bars, that despite setting record after record, we're still reaching an ever lower share of the people who actually need humanitarian assistance and who need food assistance. And out of these 333 million, it's almost 12 million people that are in Pakistan. That was all I wanted to talk about today. So the global picture and then putting Pakistan within it. And you can see that even beyond climate disasters, that whichever dimension or a driver I looked at it in this presentation, Pakistan is highly affected, and it's a country where the different drivers compound each other. And it was also recently flagged in the WFP FAO hunger hotspots report as one of 18 hunger hotspots where we are afraid that the situation could deteriorate over the next half year, especially because of economic issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crabb, for being on time and explaining the key drivers of food insecurity in Pakistan, and obviously giving us the global perspective of food insecurity. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope the participants will have questions that we will take after all the presentations. So you are with us. Yeah, that's great. Okay, to address food and nutrition insecurity, we need a multi-sectoral approach. So I request Miss Linda, Program Advisor Nutrition at WFP, for her expert opinion. And just I wanted to share that with the interest of time, we have maximum 15 minutes for each panelist. Thank you. Over to you.
Yes, great, thanks. I'm going to try to share my screen. Thank you very much as well. Let's see. Yes, here we are. Can you see it?
Yes.
Great. Okay, let me just put it on full screen mode. Okay, let's see, did it go? There. Thanks so much. And I'm very honored and humbled to be here to speak today about the multi-sectoral approaches for nutrition linked to climate change. Honorable Minister, as well as a co-panel members and all guests in the room, I'm very excited to be able to share and to discuss this important topic. There's a real pressing need, as everyone knows, for improving diets and addressing all forms of malnutrition. We know that nutrition is critical for human capital development. We also know that poor diets contribute to 1 in 5 deaths globally. Malnutrition has several different forms now. We refer to this often as the double or the triple burden of malnutrition. And basically healthy diets, we know, are one of the common contributors to all of these different forms of malnutrition. And while there's been progress over the last decades in improving malnutrition, there's still considerable work to do in order to prevent and the reverse in the progress that we've made based on the situation that Frederica just described with the triple C's and the impact that they're having on food insecurity as well as on malnutrition. We know, for instance, from the recent SOFI report, the State of Food Security and Nutrition report, that as many as more than 3 billion people can't afford the cheapest locally available healthy diet. We know, of course, that humanitarian need is going to be essential, but that while we need to focus on crisis and crisis response, we also very much need to strengthen the different systems to ensure that healthy diets and nutrition outcomes can be achieved according to the SDGs. We also have some information from other forms, other indicators where we collect diet. We know also then that children and women aren't able to meet their minimum dietary requirements. And it's important to focus on 1,000 days, but we also need to recognize that nutrition is important also for school-age children, for adolescents, and also across the entire life cycle. And we know that many people aren't able to afford healthy diets and are consuming poor diets as a result. With this slide, I just wanted to quickly show a bit of a mismatch between what we should be eating versus what we're actually producing. And I think it's just a quick capture to see that in many cases, we know based on the recent evidence, there's been a lot more nutrition is a relatively new science still, but there's been a lot of new evidence over the last decades really to show that we need to be consuming much more of a diverse diet, that we need to focus much more on fruits and vegetables. But in fact, what we produce is a bit different from that, and therefore one of the key constraints to being able to have a healthy diet, of course, is around the availability of the different foods that are required. We also know that there are issues around accessibility, so affordability of these types of foods that are needed is also a key constraint. So we hear a lot around, we speak now a lot about healthy diet, but what do we mean by that? Historically, actually, we've been focusing really on energy sufficient diets. sometimes inadvertently, because basically we know that the definition of food security includes nutrient adequacy, and it also includes, you know, a healthy diet. But in fact, how we measure food insecurity often doesn't incorporate this element. We also know from an agriculture perspective, we focused largely in most countries on cereal production. We also know now that the definition of poverty probably doesn't include the affordability of a healthy diet based on the SOFI report that I mentioned earlier. And so for many reasons, our work has focused really at a national government level, but also from the international development side, really on energy sufficient diets. But as I said, the evidence around diets, the importance of nutrition, that whole field of nutrition has expanded quite substantially over the past decades. And we know now that we really need to be talking about the importance of essential nutrients, ensuring that we have adequate vitamins and minerals in order to be able to for adequate growth and development. And then we also know more and more that we need to think about, you know, more healthy diets as thinking about protection against overweight and obesity, the double triple burden that I mentioned, and also the non-communicable diseases that are, you know, a result of poor diets. I think it's important also just to recognize that this is a journey. It's not that we will move from energy sufficient diets and policies and programs that focus more on energy sufficient diets to healthy diets within, you know, a short time frame. There are changes that we need to make across different systems over periods of time in order to progressively move from more energy sufficient diets to more healthy diets. I think this is a good segue to think about in 2013, there was a monumental Lancet series that talked about nutrition and how we begin to think and address nutrition. Although that was more than a decade ago, we still are struggling with high levels of malnutrition, but we're starting to think very differently about how we begin to approach and solve the problem of malnutrition. We're looking much more now, not just at nutrition specific interventions, but really looking across the different systems in order to be able to ensure healthy diets and better nutrition outcomes. So we can look at the food system and what it can produce. We look at contribute. We look at social protection. We're looking at education systems where we're talking about school meals, but it could also include homegrown school feeding. And it includes also education, nutrition education, and other forms of other types of interventions that are delivered through the education system. And then, of course, the health systems plays a very important role around nutrition. And they all contribute in very different ways, from, you know, kind of the production and processing side of food all the way to ensuring that we have demand for healthy dietary practices. The importance here, I think, is that, again, we need to be thinking about using all different systems, all platforms, and all sectors if we want to be able to address the problem of malnutrition. So I'm going to go back now in time. Well, I went back in time to 2013, but I'll go back again in time to when WFP worked with the national government in Pakistan in 2016, 2017. Looking at one of the first fill the nutrient gap assessments that we undertook. And this was a study to look at the affordability of nutritious diets within different countries. Pakistan was one of the first countries, and as already mentioned earlier this afternoon, the access to healthy diets in Pakistan is still far from adequate. And in some areas, more than 80% of households can't afford a nutrient adequate diet. And I think this idea that the economic access was a great barrier towards nutritious diets now I think is quite widely accepted, and we've been able to conduct fill the nutrient gap in more than 30 different countries. Pakistan, as I said, was one of the first countries where we were able to undertake this assessment. And it's really actually allowed us to look again much more holistically across different systems to identify different solutions for addressing malnutrition. The BNP program as part of BIS in Pakistan is really one of the key globally recognized successes for nutrition sensitive social protection. And a lot of the work here came from contributions from the national government, from the Aga Khan Foundation, and also building on the Fill the Nutrient Gap assessment. It meets many of the criteria that are now being used to set up nutrition sensitive social protection in other countries. It's evidence-based. There was operational research that showed that this program could reduce stunting. It's targeted to 1,000 days, and it includes the provision of a specialized nutritious food. The national government in Pakistan has been able to scale the program and continues to expand coverage of the program. It links important systems, so it's based in the in the social protection program, but it also has very important and strong linkages to the health system, and it also has an M&E system in it so that we're able to monitor progress. Again, this program is really one of the few programs that has been able to mix kind of the family income with the child and maternal nutrition support, and it's one of those big promises to being able to address malnutrition. And so this is really, as I said, a model country for global nutritionists. I think there's also some really important work ongoing within the BNP that I think warrants mention, and that's again looking at how to make the program even more cost effective. We also talked, and it's already been mentioned this morning, about how in fact we can make our social protection systems much more climate and shock responsive. And then how we can begin to think about how do we link this type of a social protection, a program that increases economic access, how do we link that with food systems and food systems transformation, including, for instance, looking at the value chains for the local supplementary food that's being provided, but also looking at food fortification and looking at other the value chains for other nutritious foods that can actually help to improve the overall family diet, which then of course helps to reduce the cost of the nutrient diet. So I spoke this, essentially what we're looking at when we think about addressing improving diets and addressing malnutrition is that we want to look at both the demand side and the supply side. So the BNP is an excellent example really in terms of looking at the demand side, because what it helps us do is it helps to increase the household purchasing power. There are other ways that we can use to increase purchasing power through livelihood supports, for instance, through resilience. By increasing yields at agriculture, we can increase the incomes and purchasing power of smallholder farmers. Many ways to actually think about that. And on the other hand, we need to be targeting those that we know are more nutritionally vulnerable. So that includes looking at prevention, but it also includes looking at other target groups. So looking at school-age children and looking at beyond 1,000 days to the 8,000 day window, where we include school-age children, adolescent girls, as part of the important, more vulnerable target groups to reach with nutrition interventions. But on the other side, we can have a big impact on improving diets and reducing malnutrition by also linking that increased purchasing power to stronger and more and to better food systems that provide more nutritious foods. So we can look at food fortification of the commonly consumed foods and staple foods. We can also look at locally produced complementary foods. So those are ways that we increase the nutrient content of particular foods. At the same time, we can also look at increasing the availability and lowering the price of nutritious foods. And here again, too, we're looking at ways that we can engage with market and retail. We're looking at identifying value chains for more nutritious foods. We're looking at reducing the food loss, which is an important post-harvest loss, which is an important way, particularly for when we know that a lot of the more nutritious foods have the higher post-harvest loss percentages. So thinking about ways to actually do this. And then also thinking again about transportation and storage. Those are also ways that we can really complement the work that's been done in Pakistan, for instance, under the BNP, with a very strong social protection program that really increases household purchasing power, but connect that also then to stronger food systems that allow us to combine the supply and the demand together in order to be able to address malnutrition. Federica also already mentioned this. I'm going to shift now and just talk a little bit about climate and nutrition, and how some of the systems work that we can do both on the social protection side, but also on the food system side, takes the angle of climate change in order for us to be able to tackle both simultaneously. Federica also already showed that there's been a dramatic increase in climate-related shocks. When we think about how climate change and climate shocks impacts on nutrition, we're looking at the various different impacts, right? So we know that that there's variable rainfall. We know that there's increase in temperatures. We know that there's more intense cyclones, severe flooding, more droughts. At the same time, the impact that has on healthy diets then really is around availability. So we have reduced crop yields, reduced production. It also has an impact, of course, on affordability, because incomes can be reduced as a result of climate change, but also food prices can increase. There's also potentially issues around accessibility, so reduced diversity and availability in local markets. But then also we know that the nutrient content of foods is also impacted by climate change. We also know that there's a number of impacts of climate change on the other causes of malnutrition. So we know that it can have an impact on water and disease outlooks, on basic services, the availability. In many cases, climate can disrupt availability and access to different health, nutrition, sanitation services. It also can have an impact on family well-being, which can have an impact on caring practices, as well as on IYCF and infant feeding. And again, that's linked to family well-being, but it can also disrupt breastfeeding and access to complementary foods. So there are a number of big connections between climate and nutrition. This slide, it's very busy. I won't go through all of it in the interest of time, but essentially it's quite a complex slide, but I wanted to just mention and highlight this tool that's being developed. It's a follow-on to the Fill the Nutrient Gap tool, and it's actually going to allow us to look both at the impact of climate on nutrition and diets, but also to look at the impact of the contribution of diets and the contribution of diets through food systems on climate change, because we know, of course, that food systems are a very large contributor to the global greenhouse gas emissions. So we want to begin to make choices that can have a positive impact, as you'll see in the left side, a positive impact on what it is that we're able to eat, but also to ensure that we're not outstripping our planet resources in the decisions that we make around what we're able to produce, and ways that we can improve nutrition without having dramatic impacts. So I'm going to just show quickly a couple slides on, we've done some work recently in Cambodia where we looked at the Fill the Nutrient Gap, and we started to do some modeling around Enhance. And again, we were able to look kind of using secondary data on the impact of climate change on nutrition, but also the environmental impact kind of a nutrient adequate basket. So looking at, if we identify how we can improve the diet, what is the environmental impact of that? And how do we use that information? Within WFP, we've identified kind of 3 different areas where we think we can prioritize efforts in order to minimize and protect the impact of climate and impact of climate on our nutrition and food security outcomes. On the left of the slide, you'll see the different types of analytics that we use in order to be able to better understand what these impacts might be. And again, the Enhance is under development, and it's a critical tool for us to be able to kind of look at the dual nature of the two sides. But we can look at social protection and particularly shock responsive social protection and social assistance. It's a critical area for us, but also looking at climate risk insurance. As part of anticipatory and early actions and emergency preparedness and response, there are a number of areas that we can unpack and look at that will allow us to better address how climate can impact, how we can minimize the impact of climate. And then, of course, there are a number of different things that we can do to ensure that our food systems are both sustainable and climate resilient. And that includes looking, again, at more nature-based solutions, looking at climate smart agriculture, looking at resilient infrastructure and clean energy, clean water, and also then sustainable food supplies and looking at local markets. And just quickly, this again is the example from Cambodia, but I think again it's relevant quite globally. And essentially, it's just looking at both adaptation and mitigation strategies that we can keep in mind as we're moving towards making decisions around how food systems and social protection come together with the crisis of climate to lead to better nutrition outcomes and diet outcomes. And so again, looking at the use of water, looking at the different resilient crops, thinking about diversity within our production systems, but then also water management, switching to crops that have smaller global greenhouse gas emissions. And then again, thinking from kind of the more on the food security side, there's a number of things that we can do both in terms of nudging consumer behaviors. Again, thinking about fortification as an important outcome, looking at more agriculture market information system, thinking again about social protection, responding to climate shocks. I wanted to end just with a quick note on COP28. The key priorities, I think, of COP are well known. Particularly WFP is focusing on, very interested because of the important focus that the COP28 will have on food systems transformation. And there, WFP on the right-hand side is really thinking about how do we engage to help in the food insecure communities to minimize the impact of climate. We're looking at how we can scale up and use climate investments, looking at really through how do we think about improving food systems, looking again at our school-based programs, but also looking at the social protection programs like in Pakistan, where by increasing the purchasing power of households, we can also then have an impact on the demand and the improvement of food systems. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Linda, it's an honor for us to have such an insightful presentation on nutrition perspective. And particularly the systems approach is very comprehensive pathway to focus that allows us to think broadly in terms of multi-sectoral approach. And happy to see that nutrition is being integrated within the social protection like BNP, and hope to see a lot more in this aspect. And thanks again. Moving forward, I request Mr. Daniel Masood for his key findings of his study on food security in Pakistan.
Working.
Miss Linda, it's request, can you please stop sharing your screen? Thank you. Wonderful.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank SDPI for having me here at SDC. It's a great honor for me to address in front of such esteemed panelists. At present, as you all know, we are facing severe issues regarding food security. Before getting into the specifics, I'll be explaining what basically food security is and what are the current food security situation in Pakistan. I'll request kindly if you can show the slides. So according to the FAO, food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. By 2022, approximately 735 million people found themselves in a state of chronic hunger. That accounts to be 9.2% of the world's total population. Pakistan is among the 55 countries most vulnerable to hunger and malnutrition listed by the Global Food Report of the World Food Programme. National Nutrition Survey 2018 showed that 36.9% of the population faces food insecurity. Pakistan has been facing a food security crisis with more than 20% of its population malnourished and around 45% of the children under 5 suffering from stunting. The global acute malnutrition rate of Pakistan is 17.7%, which exceeds the emergency threshold. That's very alarming. This is a brief overview of the Global Hunger Index ranking of Pakistan and a few other countries from South Asia between 2015 and 2023. This overview shows that Pakistan has only minimally improved. At the same time, Afghanistan and India are worse off than before, while the remaining countries, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, have improved, but also very minimally. I hope all this data is very convincing that it's an urgent need for Pakistan to solve its food security crisis. In keeping the indicator in consideration, the objectives of our study are to assess the current state of food security situation in Pakistan, to identify the primary factors influencing food security situation in Pakistan, to present the review of existing policies and measures in addressing food security challenges in Pakistan, and to provide policy recommendations to improve food security situation in Pakistan. Due to short of time, I'll be skipping the literature review and moving on towards the methodology of this research. Due to shortage of time, as I've skipped the literature review, this is the methodology. This research paper used descriptive methodology to analyze the food security situation in Pakistan. In the first phase, we used data from published sources such as Ministry of National Food Security, Economic Survey of Pakistan, Pakistan Bureau of Statistics. We have extracted the data to have an analysis of those data. In the second phase, which we'll be doing in upcoming days, is to conduct the key informant interviews of different experts to have more deep insight of this contemporary issue. Now I'll be moving toward the analysis. As you can see, we are improving and achieving the SDG goal 2. However, we can do much better as our growth pace is not very much satisfying. The one silver lining which I can say is that food availability is increasing in Pakistan. However, few crops are inconsistent and facing fluctuation. Example, wheat and pulses. As far as per capita availability is concerned, The table shows that there are fluctuations in the per capita availability of wheat, rice, and pulses. The fluctuation mainly are caused by an increase in population, drastic climate condition, and the mismanagement of the government. These are some key factors causing food security challenges in Pakistan: climate change, political and governance factor, social factors, and economic factors. As far as climate factors are concerned, increase in temperature affects arid land by making it more dry and increase poverty in farming community. The Food and Agriculture Organization stated that flood 2022 destroyed 1.7 million hectares of agrarian land and major agriculture products and livestock in Pakistan. According to an estimate, the flood pushed an additional 2.5 million into extreme hunger. International Rescue Committee pointed out that floods during 2022 affected 65% of the Pakistan major food crops. Political and governance factor. Political instability and inefficiency is prevailing in Pakistan. Lack of implementation of existing policy and measures, issues such as lack of mechanization, lack of access to basic inputs, normal credits to the scarcity and higher cost of production. Social factors. Rapid population growth in Pakistan is one of the major factors that is causing food security situation in Pakistan. As I've mentioned before, that decreased per capita availability of food is due to the population increase. Cultural taboos obstructing female education and food utilization is also a very major factor. As far as economic factors are concerned, due to increase in poverty, people are unable to afford minimum level of nutritious food. High unemployment rate and inflation rate are key factors affecting the accessibility towards basic nutritious food. Now I'll be discussing the key observations that I've observed during this study. First of all, Pakistan faces a complex food security crisis driven by various factors I have mentioned before, including climate change, economic challenges, and political instability. COVID-19 pandemic and global events like Ukraine-Russia war have aggravated economic crisis and inflation, contributing to food insecurity. While Pakistan has seen an increase in the production of certain food items like milk, rice, and pulses, these levels are not enough to meet the need of its rapidly growing population. Supply side challenges, climate shifts, and inefficient farming techniques aggravate the issue. Regional disparities. Significant regional disparities in food availability and access exist across Pakistan. Majority of the districts suffer from low food accessibility, and there is a wide disparity between different districts in Pakistan. Per capita availability of staple food items such as wheat, rice, and pulses fluctuates annually. Mismanagement and population growth contribute to these fluctuations. Food availability, food accessibility crisis. Poverty is a major factor contributing to the food accessibility crisis in Pakistan, as we have a high food inflation rate. The poverty rate has increased, limiting the purchasing power of the population and compelling them to rely on less nutritious food options. Now I'll be discussing the recommendation portion, and I think this is the most important part of the study. The foremost policy recommendation is to enhance the agriculture productivity. By investing in modern agriculture practices such as precision farming, crop diversification, and improved irrigation techniques, we can achieve a more food secure Pakistan. We can promote sustainable farming by efficient water management, soil conservation methods, and improving rural infrastructure to reduce post-harvest losses. We need to strengthen our social safety nets, expanding social safety net programs like Benazir Income Support Program to provide direct cash transfer to vulnerable households, implemented targeted food subsidy programs to make essential food items more affordable for the low-income people. Another most important policy recommendation, and I must say that this is the policy which can lead to sustainable food secure Pakistan, is to promote nutrition education, launching public awareness campaigns, promoting proper nutrition and healthy eating habits, particularly among women and children. The last recommendation which I want to present is to enhance the food supply stability. We need to develop a comprehensive disaster preparedness plans with early warning systems, emergency responses strategies, and resilient infrastructure to mitigate the impact of natural disasters. We need to focus on conflict resolutions, peace building efforts to reduce the impacts of conflicts on food supply, particularly in the vulnerable regions. These recommendations collectively form a comprehensive strategy to address Pakistan food security challenges, promote sustainable development, and improve the well-being of its citizens. A coordinated and a sustained effort at federal and provincial level is vital to achieving these objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel, for giving us some more and some additional aspects of food insecurity in Pakistan. And you are absolutely right about population growth. Yes, it is one of the key factors that we need to focus while policy response. When we talk about the food and nutrition security, gender equality is one of the major concern in all of the developing countries like Pakistan. So to discuss it further, I request Dr. Anila Afzal to please share her views on this aspect. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, STPI, for having me. I'm going to present on gender and food security in the epicenter of climate change in South Asia and Hindu-Kush Himalaya region. So I would like to start with few lines of my poetry. Let's salute the women who give birth to life, who enliven the living with their tender caress, who command the hearts with their soft whispers, and who rule the world with their ethereal beauty. My apologies, I wrote these lines just for women, but you all know very well, gender is not synonymous with women. Anyone can do a wonderful work with their positive thinking. So just excuse my manners, being a more feminist in this slide. So I will talk about gender and vulnerability and drivers and opportunities for gender adaptation, levers for gender adaptation policies and value chain practices, and way forward. Gender vulnerability is based on three major conditions. Number one, gender division of labor. Number two is gender attitude. Number three is gender behavior. Gender division of labor makes women responsible for the household activities like cooking, cleaning, taking care of children and elder member, managing livestock and other crop activities. And in mountainous or the regions or in remote areas, water collection and the fuel collection is also responsibility of women. And as these resources become scarcer because of climate change and environmental conditions, it means they have to travel farther to collect these resources. So it means they are going to compromise their income generating activities, going to schools and participating in trainings, workshops, and lots of decision-making stuff. So this is about somehow gender division of labor. And second is gender attitude. Women are less visible. They are not represented at national and local level, so they have not decision-making power. Gender behavior, if you see women usually employed in an informal sector where they lack safety nets and limited salaries. If you see women on only 3% agricultural land in Pakistan, agricultural land. So 3% land is meaningless because they have to depend on the male members to operate their farms. So these are the few gender vulnerability conditions. And according to IMF, if the women farmer have access to resources like land, credit, or fertilizer, output can be increased by 2.5 to 4%, which can be much more for developing countries like Pakistan. So according to IMF. So this is a gender gap index. This is an aggregate data, not reflect the diversity, but the situation in the mountainous region is quite worse. And in this gender gap index, you can see only one country categorized among top 50 countries in the gender gap index, I think Bangladesh. So these are the 4 indicators: political empowerment, health and survival, educational attainment, economic participation and opportunity. Afghanistan is not the part of the index. If it were, it might be close to the Yemen and Iran. Bangladesh is the best performer in South Asia, and the success stems from political participation. Bhutan is our average performer. China has been improving ranking, but lower number of female child dropping its ranking. India has made progress in wage quality for similar work and succeed in closing tertiary education fully. Myanmar is the second best performer in South Asia regarding this. Nepal, again, is not the front runner. Pakistan has made attainment in educational attainment, made some progress, but still Pakistan has recorded precarious gender situation even worse than its neighbors. So this is somehow in gender gap index, you can get some situation in South Asia regions. So change is actually unleashed from different sides. We can't see climate change in isolation. So these are few factors, few drivers, sometimes neutralize the impact of climate change, demographic shifts, economic forces, and globalization. Climate change, according to International Commission on Snow and Ice, most of the glacier in Hindu Kush Himalaya region will vanish by 2035. And almost all the major Asian rivers originates from these glaciers. And global warming definitely will impact our lives. And if we just take example of just one river, Indus River flows from India, China to India, India to Pakistan, and more than half population of the world staying in these regions. And global warming will definitely cause Indus, and because these countries are epicenter of future economic landscape. So in global warming, we can say if the future wars will be fought on water, Indus water will be the first to cause eruption of such wars. So in this fight against climate change, women will be the biggest losers. Demographic shift, male out migration is a very important trend in the demographic shifts. Male resort to out migration to fight against climate change, but women have to stay at the same place, and they have to work on some of the resilient like food or the crop pattern or some other things, the fodder crops, winter fodder crops for the herders. But at the same time, remittances are increasing the buying power of the household. So this is the another side of this thing. So lots of already discussed the urbanization or stuff. So I'm going to skip this one. Economic forces, many dams are built in these areas. So all these mega projects bring good or bad of the capitalist society with them. So these mountainous regions are very resilient. They prove they are resilient, and we have to see the globalization will work for them or not. So these are a few gender adaptation strategies and practices for food security. Male out migration, as I told, men can fight against climate change through the migration, but for the women, it's pretty harder to leave that place. So they have to survive at the same place and work on the diversifying crops and resilient varieties. And ecotourism is it's an important trend in these areas, and communities can generate livelihood through ecotourism, but there must be a strong player between them to invest in ecosystem, because they can't do they have no money to do things regarding this. So climate smart agriculture, already Linda talked about this, and this may also very helpful. I'm trying, okay. So government's usual response for climate change or things is just like firefighting. You have seen in floods, and you can't see the holistic approach. You can get just information in bits and pieces, but the policies are failed to provide the holistic approach. And climate ministry or the policy hardly talk about the water conservation. 80% water we use in agriculture, and we are using a flooding technique, and we did not talk much about this. So there is a low gender focus, and we need a result-based management. It may strengthen the policy work. For the last 18 years, I have been working on gender, and gender is quite tricky business. And I have successfully worked on these models for the livelihood generation, and some of the very innovative strategy, value chain development, CSV, creating shared value model by the Michael Porter. And Nestle used this model, and they increase 50% supply in Pakistan by using this model. So we can replicate the success stories in our region. Nudging, also Richard Thaler received a Nobel Prize on this concept, and through nudge we can create greater impact with limited resources. So I have been working for the last several years on these models. These are very, very effective. Benchmarking, I work with the UC Davis, California in this project. It's about the comparison between the female farmers in California and the female farmers in Pakistan, in Punjab. Next is a technique of an influencer I use with the USAID on the project of ICT use of Pakistani young girls in rural farming household. So this is also very innovative technique. And if you want to hear more about this, you can contact with me, because Rabia have given me this one. So this is my last slide about, this is a beautiful picture from Nepal, I think. So I wrote again from few things from my book, if you, so thank you very much. This is all about me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neela, and sorry for that, because we are running out of time. Thanks for sharing with us the gender inequalities and how climate change is making it even worse for the women in Pakistan and South Asia as well. Now I request Dr. Irfanullah, Deputy Director, Pakistan Nutrition International, for his views on climate change implications for nutrition security in Pakistan, with the focus on need for collaborative efforts. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Honorable Minister, distinguished panelists, organizers of the event, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. First of all, I'm thankful for giving this opportunity to the Nutrition International to discuss this important issue of impacts of climate change on nutrition and food security. So the challenge with the last presenter is that the content of the your presenter's presentation has already been displayed by the other colleagues. So I would like to refresh maybe the knowledge on the climate change and maybe some of the recommendations from the work that we are doing and which is actually contributing to the to address the challenge of the climate change. So worldwide, about 800 million people lack access to food globally, and in Pakistan, around half of the population is suffering from the anemia, the iron deficiency, stunting, and almost 80% are having vitamin D deficiency and zinc deficiency, and other vitamins and mineral deficiencies are not the exception. And it is quite a challenge to address all of these through unisectoral approach. My other colleagues have already talked about the multi-sectoral approach, how we can address this issue through the convergence of different ministries, departments to address this issue. I'd just like to touch upon the food fortification. For example, there was a recommendation given by one of our distinguished panelists. In Pakistan, the food fortification at large scale, it started in 2016. There were some pilots implemented by the WFP and the Nutrition International jointly in AJK and in different part of Pakistan. But at large scale, it was started in 2016, and Nutrition International started the fortification of the edible oil and wheat flour fortification. Alhamdulillah, the 100% of the formal sector of edible oil industry is now producing the adequately fortified edible oil. And currently, 130 million population of Pakistan is having access to the adequately fortified edible oil. Similarly, there were efforts made on the towards the iodization of the salt, and for last 20 years, if I give you an example of the data of the National Nutrition Survey, in 2001, only 17% households were utilizing the iodized salt. But the National Nutrition Survey of 2018 shows that now 80% households are utilizing the iodized salt, and this credit goes to the government, the ownership of the government, and the partners like Nutrition International, WFP, UNICEF, and others, and also the concerned ministry, the Ministry of Health, and the Fortification Alliance, who are actually looking after the iodization process. So the objective of telling you this is that it is possible, but the main I would say the driving force behind this is the commitment and the ownership. When the government takes the ownership, when there is a commitment from the senior leadership, then it is doable. We have another example of the wheat flour fortification. There was no, I mentioned about the edible oil fortification and salt iodization. There were laws available since 1965, but in case of wheat flour fortification, there was very, there were no standards in place, no law available, and because of the political economy, it was very difficult and is still challenging to scale up the wheat flour fortification in Pakistan. Although we are working with the provincial governments, doing advocacy with the legislators, with the policymakers, And we were able to get the food fortification law enacted in 3 out of 4 provinces with the support of the government, the concerned food departments, and the Fortification Alliance, which is based at the Ministry of Health. Yet the most important province of Punjab, which is 70%, holding 70% share of the wheat and wheat flour, is not having this legislation in place. It is quite an advanced stage, but we need support from the government to push this agenda of fortification forward, so that people can have access to the fortified food, which is fortified with, in case of wheat flour, with iron, zinc, folic acid, and vitamin B12. Why I'm telling you this, the topic is different, but I just wanted to talk about some of the recommendations, so that put this forward in the front of the panelists who can contribute, also the audience, and to create awareness and sensitization, how we can actually push this agenda forward in order to address the micronutrient deficiencies in Pakistan. So, and of course, the other, among other recommendations given towards the multi-sectoral approach, some of the agriculture, this climate smart agriculture is the need of the hour. Also the land reforms, because when these climate incidents, or I would say these floods and earthquakes and the droughts, these occurs, the small landholders, subsistence farmers, and basically the fisher folks, and they are basically the ones who are facing the complex climate change challenge, and these are the ones who are basically affected by the climate change, and they are all these shocks basically result in the lack of I would say decline in the agriculture yield and lack of access to the food. So with this, I would like to conclude this the remarks that I was planning to give on the climate change, but I would leave it to the our esteemed chair, so that he can actually provide us support into addressing the climate change issue, and also taking forward the agenda of food fortification. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irfan, for sharing some success stories and also highlighting some challenges that needs to be focused to move forward with the agenda of nutrition for all. Before moving and requesting our esteemed and honorable Minister Saab, I request 5 questions, very quick 5 questions from the audience. Okay, Mike, please, agar aap le aaye. Sure. Mike, please, agar aap le aaye.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I'm grateful to SDPI for inviting me for this very vitally important subject. As I have been the Additional Secretary of Ministry of National Food Security Research, beside being the NIPS heads as Executive Director, National Institute of Population Studies. So these are all our interconnected things. And I will not take much of the time, but my question to the Honorable Minister is, because he is the Minister of Planning and he can lead the issues where we have been highlighted by all the speakers in the conference. Most importantly, sir, I believe that there's a lack of integration of policies, because after the 18th Amendment, the population was, devolved to the provinces. Now, this national food security issues, the speakers have highlighted about the nutrition values, the anemic children, the stunted children, the floods, and the earthquakes, other like Ukraine issues. We have identified the issues. We have identified this. We have got the data. The only thing which we are lacking is the implementation. And that may be the reason of the non-consistent policies, non-continuation of the governments in the past, which have led to this position. My request would be that Honorable Minister should take all the ministers, relevant ministers. When I talk about relevant minister, I talk about the Ministry of Food Security. I talk about the all provincial secretaries of the populations, the NIFs, and so that they can lead. And because these all have cross-cutting issues, whether it is population, it's cross-cutting issues, this issue of food insecurity, this is also cross-cutting issues. So that will be the way forward, I think, will help mitigate all the issues relating to food insecurity, relating to all the climate change. And let me tell you also this, I was in Washington in 2014 when the SDGs were adopted by the governments. Look at this now, we are in 2023, and the flood recent in 22 has really awakened us from the slumber. So I think we need to address this in continuity of this reform, continuity of policies, continuity of I think issues. These relevant measures can mitigate this issue, and this food security challenge can be covered. So I would be highly grateful on the minister should take the lead in this case. Thank you very much.
Honor for us to have you with us. Quickly, all rest of the 4 questions. Yes, please, then.
Okay, my name is Salar Babar and I'm from NEST. I'm studying government and public policy. So Mr. Danyal is a good friend of mine, but it won't give the liberty to ask a question. Mr. Danyal, you mentioned about the historical trend regarding the food. What about the agriculture after 18th Amendment? What was the trend? Because after 18th Amendment, agriculture was devolved to the provincial and the local governments. Furthermore, I have a question from Ms. Linda, and I would also like the comment of our esteemed minister. Mr. Linda mentioned about the availability and accessibility of food. But what I, as a student, public policy student, the food security consists of 4 dimensions of availability, accessibility, and utilization and stability. What about the utilization? You mentioned about giving nutrition education to the children, but what about our country having second world out of largest out of school children, which is according to UNICEF 22.8 million students. Apart from that, we didn't mention about the social culture factors. What about the literacy rate? We have more than 70 million people that are illiterate. Our literacy rate is 62.8%. How gonna we address this? How gonna you tell the women in the rural area to give the nutrition food, to give the nutrients to your children? That's my greatest concern. What about the stability?
Can you please quickly summarize it?
Sure. So my 2 greatest questions were regarding the utilization and the stability. We didn't mention about the we didn't address the utilization phase and the stability value phase. That is linked to the governance approaches. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Dr. Maimoona Rauf, and I'm an economist. There's a huge demand for contraceptives in the country, and the bad outcome of that is you have all these children and child abuse, child labor, terrible stuff. Bangladesh, China, India, they progressed after they, put a stop to their population. Why can't we make contraceptives available? I don't know. There are so many LHVs. They should be the most important people in Pakistan. But anyway, that is a very big, I think, flaw. The other thing is that our food prices, this is to the minister, sir, our food prices have gone through the roof, and everybody's always talking about, Ukraine and other things. What about the floods? They decreased everything, the prices so much, and we did not import any food from India. So it's a very, very flawed policy. Sorry, that was my question.
Hi, my name is Shazif Khan. I'm director of Pakistan's People-Led Disaster Management. My first question is in the pyramid, in the chart you were showing of food we're eating versus food we should be eating, it showed grain being overrepresented in the food that we should be eating. Is that a condemnation of the past 10,000 years of agriculture in which was grain-based? And the second question is, we're talking about food security. That should include ensuring food supply for the huge population the world has for many centuries. And the problem is our current agricultural system or food system, it is very productive and supporting billions of people, but it's run on methods that are, you make use of natural resources in a non-sustainable way. Like first, the farms were fed by guano deposits, and that means over extraction of guano, because the few places in the world that do produce guano, they don't produce a lot of it. And after that, we replaced it with the Haber-Bosch process, but that runs on natural gas and natural gas extraction from the earth, and that's a finite supply of that. So if all of that runs out, what do we have to grow our food? So basically it's innovation and technological advancements that have produced the current food supply that feeds so many people, but how long would it last? And if its momentum runs out, what do we have to ensure sustainable food supply for all times to come? Thanks.
Thank you, Shazib. I guess it's, I'm really sorry, I have to cut it short. So let me request our honorable guest. So I guess you have 15 minutes for conclude the session, and then you can also respond to all these questions. But quickly, Shazib and any other panelists want to respond to these questions online or in person? Yes, please.
I want to respond to Mr. Salar that after 18th Amendment, the federal government has the less room to roam around as far as the food and the agriculture is concerned. So I think due to the political instability and the less cooperation between the federal and provincial government, we are unable to achieve or desired outcomes.
Yes, Linda, are you there with us? You want to respond? Yes. Please.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks very much. And I'll respond both to the question around utilization and stability, and then also around the what we supply versus what we should be eating. I guess in terms of utilization, I didn't raise it maybe sufficiently, but for sure addressing behaviors that will improve both the dietary practices, but also the demand side to pull the food systems towards providing more nutritious foods is critical for being able to address malnutrition. So we need to definitely, focus on both availability, accessibility, and quote unquote utilization, which reflects what people eat, but also the health, the water sanitation, et cetera issues. They're all important, very important. And that's why I highlighted the four systems as all having an important role to play in order to address malnutrition. I think on the stability side, I think that's exactly what we're talking about today, kind of, because the stability of food security and of food systems is really, all about how do we address both climate and the other shocks that are having impacts on what we are able to eat and what we can afford to eat. And this is where, we need to continue to find solutions for more sustainable food systems that are going to be able to, handle these different shocks. I think in terms of the food, what's currently being produced versus what we should be eating, I think there are two things that are relevant there. One, I think, is that if we look historically in diets, and I'll be very quick on this because we could talk about this probably for a couple of hours. I think if you look historically at diets, you'll find that historically that there was actually, in many populations, there was a mix of cereal and animal source foods. We have herders that historically consume very little cereal, and cereal, the introduction of cereal into diets actually came at a very late stage, kind of, if you look, very historically. And I think so I think it's important to think about, the lifespan, the changes that have happened, over the last 100 years, and the knowledge that we have about nutrition now, and the importance of vitamins and minerals in order to really contribute both on the human capital side, but also kind of on the longevity side, so addressing these non-communicable diseases. I think it becomes really important, kind of. So I think from that side, it's important. And then I think the other side links back to, I think, your particular point, is that we need to be thinking about what we eat in terms of how we're going to save our planet, and how we're going to continue to be able to produce enough, and enough of the right foods. So that means we have to think carefully about what our diet is, and the contribution of our diet on the greenhouse gas emissions and other challenges that we face with climate. So, and I agree with you completely. We really need to be thinking carefully about, the innovations. I think there are lots of traditional practices that are probably also very good, that we need to, bring back, that we need to be encouraging, and also keep looking for innovation in order to be able to sustain our food systems for healthy diets, as well as sustaining the planet. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Renda. Now it's the final moment to listen our esteemed and distinguished Mr. Honorable Minister Saab. Please, over to you. Please conclude the session. And it's up to you.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ms. Coco Yeshiva, Country Director, World Food Program. Esteemed panelists, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Let me at the outset thank World Food Program and STPI to invite me to this very lightening discussion on a topic of great importance. Let me also commend the World Food Program and STPI to organize this event. The specific topic of today's discussion, negative impacts of climate change on food security and nutrition situation in Pakistan. Panelists who gave presentations on the subject have highlighted the wider issue of food insecurity, prevalence of poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and given a global perspective, and also they have shared insights and information about the situation in Pakistan. I'm sure these inputs would help the policymakers in the country to use their insights and inputs into policy making going forward. And I would look forward to the document which STPI hopefully will prepare on the discussions that you had in this seminar, and will use that knowledge and the strategies that panelists have highlighted in their discourse into future development planning process. Now, the effects of climate change on food security have been well documented by now. And the main challenge in the context of food security is the adverse impact on agricultural output and productivity. And because performance of agriculture sector, especially the food crops, livestock, poultry, and so on the supply side, that is directly linked with the overall supply of food in the country. So, as you are aware, Pakistan has has a wide resource base, wide agricultural resource base, land, water, and a big rural population who are engaged in agriculture. What we lack in agriculture sector is low productivity. That is an issue which Pakistan is facing, and as compared to other regional countries and also the world at large. So our development strategy has to focus on enhancing agricultural productivity. And while we do that, we also take into account now the resilience that we need to build into our agricultural sector in view of the challenges of climate change. So all the interventions that you have highlighted, a panelist referred to inefficient use of water, water conservation practices, and better quality inputs, seed, fertilizer, climate resilient farming practices, and increased use of mechanization, etc. So all these interventions are needed and are being focused upon to enhance productivity of the agriculture sector. Just for your information, the government is also focusing on using best international practices, and also we are looking forward to investments, foreign investments in corporate agriculture sector. That is one of the important areas of investment that SIFC, which you are aware of, the Special Investment Facilitation Council, which is now tasked with the role of bringing in foreign investment. And it's not only money, capital that we sort of are trying to attract, but also the best practices in agri. So agriculture is one of the 5-6 areas of focus under SIFC, and the federal government through the SIFC is closely working on with the provinces. In fact, the corporate agriculture initiatives are obviously based in the provinces, and provinces have identified and allocated large chunks of land, and investment strategies being devised. The second area, major, and I'm focusing on the macro picture because eminent panelists have already gone into and delved into the specifics of the subject. On the demand side, of course, accelerating economic development. And in our peculiar situation, economic stabilization is very important to provide a sort of a framework for long-term investment and growth in the economy. And because with growth we have employment opportunities, we have the trickle-down effect. So the overall economic development strategy to make it more inclusive and more climate sensitive. And then together with macroeconomic stabilization, structural reforms to ensure long-term growth, we have to cater to the immediate effects of macro stabilization on vulnerable segments of the population. We have effective social protection interventions, and Ms. Linda referred to the Benazir Income Support Program and the nutrition component of that program that has been appreciated by development experts around the world. And it is an effective program, and that caters to the needs of the vulnerable population. On climate change challenges that we face and the calamities that we have faced, floods of last year, 2022 floods, and before that we had 2010 floods, very large scale, and earthquake in 2005. Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. It's well known, and this sort of is a new area that has emerged globally as well as in our national context. So Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, with the support of development partners, a UN system, or multilateral institutions, or bilateral partners in development, they have been very actively working on this area. And you are fully aware of the 4F strategy that Planning Commission in the wake of floods last year devised, and we are implementing that strategy. Agriculture and livelihoods are important components of that strategy, and we have a number of interventions in the federal development program called the PDSP and provincial ADPs. And on livelihoods also there is focus on specific interventions. I don't have the time at the moment to sort of give you the details, but we have a number of interventions in this area. Now coming to the specific questions raised by distinguished participants on coordination between various levels of government. Let me apprise you that adequate constitutional mechanisms for ensuring federal, provincial, and local government level coordination, they exist. National Economic Council is a mechanism under the Constitution that approves the provincial, national, and provincial development programs when the budget is prepared and is presented to the Parliament for approval. Then we have Economic Coordination Committee of the Cabinet that meets on need basis, on average twice a week normally. And this afternoon, we have the ECC meeting. We meet quite often. And provincial governments, issues that relate to provincial governments, they are also part of the discussion and the decision making. And the price situation and the supply of commodities situation, especially food, wheat, and so on, they are constantly reviewed at the ministerial level by the Ministry of Food Security, which our eminent colleague, Mr. Bassat, has been additional secretary. They are constantly monitoring, and they generate a monthly report on the commodity situation. It is on their website. And then for development projects and interventions, there are steering committees set up for national projects, where federal government representatives and relevant provincial government representatives are represented. So there is a continuous process of dialogue and discussion, and that feeds into policy making and development plans formulation, implementation, and coordination. We have the CCI, which is a constitutional forum, Council of Common Interests, that looks into issues which fall under its ambit, especially water sharing and other issues. The impression that 8th Amendment or agriculture, in fact, has been a provincial subject even before 18th Amendment. I have been Secretary Agriculture in Punjab way back in 1998, 99. It's now 24 years. And we have fora at the national level because, the policy debate between centralization and delegation and decentralization is a generic discussion. Now, the consensus in development literature and policy, public policy literature is that there should be decentralization and delegation so that provincial and local levels of government, which are closer to ground realities, should be handling these activities and the field operations required. But that the impression that there are firewalls between various levels of government is not correct. I think it's a misconceived notion. Hardly a day passes when some sectoral discussion between federation and provinces is not going on. It's part of the way the government functions. On food prices, which Madam highlighted again, inflation is an issue that we are facing. The Federal Bureau of Statistics generates the sensitive price index surveys every week. We publish the data, and that covers the information on how the prices of food basket in the typical consumer sort of pattern they are behaving. And then the CPI survey is done every month. not only the government, but policymakers, think tanks like SDPI and others, provincial governments, they all have access. And there is a National Food Price Monitoring Committee, which Minister for Planning heads. That committee meets every fortnight almost. And the ECC of the cabinet that I referred to reviews the price situation as a standing first item of the agenda. We do it every week. And that is done in coordination with the provincial government, because the macroeconomic sort of economic policy is mainly the domain of the federal government, but administrative action required to keep a check on the prices, like checking the profiteering, hoarding, etc. They fall within the ambit of the provincial governments. And we have almost every week we have a discussion with the provincial governments. And then and we do it not only at provincial level, we have gone down to the district level. The Federal Bureau of Statistics have devised an app which has a name. Now the deputy commissioners in the districts, they can access the movement of the food prices every week to see whether what the prices are, and then the gap between wholesaler price and the retail price is also being monitored. This app highlights if there is a differential between wholesale and retail above 20%. That's the benchmark which Statistics Bureau have set up. Then the presumption is that hoarding and profiteering is taking place, and then the magistrates under the supervision of the deputy commissioners and the higher ups, they sort of address that issue. Food inflation is softening, and we keep a constant vigil on that. On the utilization, the young man referred to utilization. I didn't quite get as to what specific is your concern. If you could, in a couple of sentences, elaborate as to what utilization you used in what context, then I can address that question. All right. No, Tika, please let me know what utilization, what do you mean by utilization?
The recommendations that are coming is that provide the nutrition education to the children.
Okay, all right.
But the concern is that 22.8 million children are out of school.
All right.
So how to address those?
All right, all right. So basically, out of children's school, and we have the federal PSDP and the provincial ADPs have programs on this. This is a serious issue. I agree. I know the statistics and the numbers. So we have a number of interventions in the PSDP to address that specific question. And food for school children is also, there are specific programs and interventions in that area also. But I would agree with you that we need to pay more attention to human development, especially the area which is under discussion today, the improving the rate of literacy, getting out of school children into schools, etc., and providing them food. In Benazir Income Support Program, we have incentives for mothers who send their children to school, and there's an extra topping which is made available to them apart from the monthly income support stipends. Of course, nothing is perfect. And before I forget, I must compliment the efforts made by civil society organizations and the NGOs into this area. In fact, their performance in many ways in these social sector interventions at the ground level is really commendable. And in every field, we have representatives from the private sector, from civil society organizations. On climate specifically, we have a National Climate Council, which is headed by the Prime Minister. And you must have read in the newspaper that this council met the day before yesterday. And I think the floor was with experts on climate change. And nutrition also came under discussion. We have very eminent persons on these councils.
Yes, next session is about to start.
Give us $40 billion. We have not been able to receive.
No,
Sir,
I think that
these
will be my
discussions-
last. That's again is a misconception. I'm sorry to say. The pledges which were made in Geneva in the wake of floods, they were not 40 billion was the need. That was part of our need assessment. The pledges were in the order of $10.9 billion. And out of this 10.9 for project finance, part of it is going to our commodity imports, etc. But around 6 billion are for project interventions. Projects worth 4.9 billion have already been approved, and they are under various stages of implementation. In Sindh, the projects are being implemented. In Balochistan, the projects are being implemented. And all these interventions, livelihoods, agriculture, etc., they are a part of that. And to implement, again, to address your first question about coordination, etc., there are 3 committees which, with provincial representation, with donor representation. They function. There is an oversight committee, which is headed by a planning minister, a global oversight committee, and then there is the steering committee at the secretary planning and development level. And this development program financed by pledges is a 3-year program. So we are in the first year of implementation, well ahead of the work that we need to do. But we take note of your observations about this 4F implementation. You know, sometimes the press have their own way of presenting things. But the fact of the matter is that the implementation of 4F framework is satisfactory. Thank you very much.
Please extend our heartfelt thanks to our Honorable Minister, Mr. Sami Said, and all the panelists who are with us in person and joined online. Thank you all of the participants for joining and for your good questions and participation in your discussion. Please continue these kind of discussion over the lunch and after this period. Thanks again. Thank you.